The lye burned. It always burned. But that May morning, the water felt hotter than usual. Or maybe my hands had finally worn thin enough that I couldn't tell the difference between heat and pain anymore. I plunged the Harrington family sheets into the copper tub and watched the water cloud white with soap, then pink. Pink meant I was bleeding again. I pulled my hands from the water and held them up to the morning light streaming through the window. The knuckles had split open across the ridges where the skin pulled taut every time I wrung out heavy fabric. 7 years of widowhood written in scar tissue. Each crack a day, I chose my daughter's survival over my own comfort. I'd stopped counting the scars sometime around year 3. The washboard waited. I pressed the sheet against its ridged surface and scrubbed, feeling the coarse cotton catch on my calluses. My shoulders already ached, and it wasn't even noon. By evening, they'd burned so badly I wouldn't be able to lift my arms to unbraid my hair. Sarah would have to do it for me. Her smooth young fingers gentle in my tangles. And I'd pretend I didn't notice the way she looked at my hands. Those gnarled, reddened things that no longer resembled a woman's hands at all. I heard her footsteps on the porch, light and quick. Without thinking, I wiped my bleeding hands on my apron and turned so she'd only see my back when she came through the door. "Mama?" Her voice bright, happy. "Good day at the store?" "Fine, sweetheart." I kept my hands in the wash water, hidden. Mrs. Henderson bought that bolt of calico she'd been eyeing. "Mr. Garrett says I'm the best clerk he's had." She talked while I scrubbed. I half listened, tracking the music of her voice more than the words. She was 19 now, beautiful in a way that made my chest tight. She had her father's dark eyes, his easy smile. She was outgrowing this small rented house, outgrowing my rough life. I'd known it would happen. I'd worked for it to happen. But knowing didn't make it hurt less. When she finally went to her room to change out of her store dress, I pulled my hands from the water and dried them on a rag. The bleeding had stopped, leaving rusty stains on the cotton. I folded the rag carefully and tucked it under the tub where she wouldn't see. That evening, I caught my reflection in the wash water as I dumped it into the yard. My hands broke the surface first, twisted, swollen things that looked like they belonged to someone else, someone old, someone I didn't recognize. When did I learn to hide myself from my own daughter? I didn't know the answer, but as I folded the clean laundry with careful precision, each crease perfect, each corner aligned, I understood that if I could make other people's lives look orderly, maybe no one would notice how rough my hands had become. Maybe I could remain invisible just a little longer. That night, I didn't wear gloves to bed. My hands rested uncovered on the quilt, and I stared at them in the darkness until sleep finally came. Sarah burst through the door 3 days later with her face flushed pink and her breathing fast. And I knew before she spoke that something had changed. The air around her shimmered with it, that electric quality that comes before a storm or a declaration. "Mama!" She grabbed my shoulders, laughing. "Mama! Thomas asked me to marry him." Thomas Harrington, the banker's son. I pulled her close, genuinely happy, because she was glowing and young and deserved every good thing. "Oh, sweetheart, that's wonderful." And it was wonderful. It was exactly what I'd wanted for her. A way out of this life, away from rented rooms and washing other people's dirt. But even as I held her, I felt the secondary wave hit. The Harringtons, I knew that name intimately. I knew it in the way you know something you touch every week, their monogrammed sheets, their silk undergarments, their table linen stained with wine and gravy. I knew Mrs. Harrington's hands, too. Had seen them when she came to collect her laundry. Cream-smooth hands that wore 3 diamond rings. Hands that had never touched lye soap. I looked at my own hands, still holding Sarah's shoulders, swollen knuckles, calluses like barnacles, nails broken despite my best efforts. These hands would tear delicate fabric. These hands would shame her. "I want you part of everything," Sarah was saying, still breathless. "The dress, the planning, you're all I have, Mama. You're all I need." She extended her hands toward me, wanting me to take them. Her hands were smooth, unmarked. She'd had a different life than I'd had at her age. I'd given her that. But I couldn't take her hands, not with my own rough palms. Instead, I clasped my hands behind my back and smiled. Of course, darling, whatever you need. That night, I invented a lie about new soap that had chapped my hands worse than usual. I started wearing thin cotton gloves, even indoors, even in May, in Kansas heat that made sweat pool between my shoulder blades. Sarah noticed but didn't question. Are you feeling well, Mama? Just being careful, I said. Want to keep them nice for your special day. She accepted this because she was young and happy and had no reason to doubt me. But alone in my room that night, I pulled off the gloves and examined my hands by lamplight. I tried to remember them young. At 17, on my own wedding day, my mother had rubbed lavender cream into my palms until they were soft as rose petals. I'd worn a simple dress and held wildflowers, and when James had taken my hands in his, they'd been smooth and uncertain. These hands now, gnarled, scarred, certain only of hard labor, belonged to a different woman. That 17-year-old girl was gone. She died slowly, year by year, wringing out wet clothes until her palms bled. I made myself a silent promise. I would attend Sarah's wedding. I would stand beside my daughter, but I would keep these hands hidden. Gloves in May. In Kansas. The town would think me peculiar. Mrs. Henderson might whisper. The minister's wife might raise her eyebrows. Better peculiar than shameful. Better strange than poor. I pulled the gloves back on and went to sleep with them on, feeling the damp cotton stick to my skin in the night heat. Sarah insisted we visit Mrs. Chen's shop the following week, and I resisted with every excuse I could manufacture. Too busy with washing, not feeling well, should wait until we'd saved more money. But Sarah had that determined set to her jaw, the one she'd inherited from her father, and eventually I ran out of reasons to refuse. The shop sat on the edge of town, small and immaculate. I smelled the starch before we even opened the door, that clean, sharp scent mixed with something else. Silk, maybe. Or the particular stillness that comes from a place where someone works alone. Mrs. Chen appeared from the back room, and I saw her fully for the first time. Elderly, Chinese, with a face weathered like good leather and hands that moved with absolute certainty despite their gnarled joints. She wore a high-collared dress in deep blue, and her silver hair was pinned tight at the base of her skull. Miss Garrett, she said to Sarah, her accent careful and precise. You wish a wedding dress. I watched how she stood, straight-backed, dignified, and how the town's polish showed even here, and how Sarah unconsciously positioned herself slightly in front of me, as if introducing a lesser relative. It wasn't cruelty, just habit, just the way things were. Mrs. Chen circled Sarah with a measuring tape, asked questions about lace and necklines and sleeve length. Her hands, those rough, spotted hands, moved over the fabric samples with absolute confidence. I noticed that her knuckles were swollen too, bent with what my mother would have called the arthritis. Working hands, hands like mine. Then she turned to me. The mother must help. It brings fortune to the marriage. I stammered something, keeping my gloved hands clasped tight. I'm sure Sarah and you can manage. No, Mrs. Chen's voice held no room for argument. The mother's touch is necessary. Sarah left an hour later with sketches and fabric samples, promising to return the following week. I started to follow, but Mrs. Chen's voice stopped me at the door. Mrs. Garrett, a moment. The shop felt smaller with just the two of us. Mrs. Chen moved to the window and adjusted a curtain, not looking at me directly. The gloves, she said, finally. In this heat, I understand. My throat closed. I couldn't speak. She continued, matter of fact. My accent, my face, my foreign ways. I have spent 30 years in this town, and still they call me the Chinese woman, as if I have no name. She turned to face me then. We all hide what the town finds unacceptable. I don't know what you mean. I think you do. She crossed to her work table and ran her hand over a bolt of ivory silk. I need help with this dress. Your strong hands can hold fabric taut while I sew. My old eyes fail for threading needles. We work together. My hands, I started, then stopped. What could I say? That they were too rough? That I'd ruin everything? That just touching fine fabric felt like transgression? 40 years I have worked with silk, Mrs. Chen said quietly. I know which hands harm and which help. Yours will help. It wasn't pity in her voice. It was something else. A transaction offered between equals, a partnership proposed with dignity intact. I'll ruin it, I whispered. You will not. She held out her hand, not to shake, but palm up, waiting. After a long moment, I removed my right glove. The air touched my scarred skin, and I wanted to hide, to run. But Mrs. Chen didn't flinch, didn't stare, simply reached for a bolt of ivory silk and placed it in my rough hands. Hold here, she said, just like this. I held the fabric, feeling its weight, its smoothness against my calluses. It didn't tear, didn't snag, just rested there, impossibly delicate in my impossible hands. Good, Mrs. Chen said, and somehow, in that moment, I almost believed her. 3 weeks became a rhythm I didn't know I'd been craving. After my washing work, after my shoulders burned and my back ached and my hands had wrung out their daily quota of other people's dirt, I walked to Mrs. Chen's shop. The evening light would be slanting golden through her windows, and she'd have tea brewing, bitter and dark. We didn't talk much at first. She would cut fabric with scissors that made a sound like whispered secrets, and I would hold the pieces taut while she pinned. My job was simple. Keep tension, keep stillness, keep the silk from shifting during her needlework. Simple, but not easy. I watched her hands more than I'd ever watched anyone's hands before. They were gnarled worse than mine, bent with arthritis that must have made every stitch an act of will. But they moved with absolute precision, no hesitation, no tremor, just certainty born from decades of practice. How do you do it? I asked one evening, holding a section of bodice while she set sleeve pins. With your hands, like that. She didn't look up. Like what? The arthritis. It must hurt. Yes. She placed another pin. Exact. But pain and inability are not the same thing. My hands hurt. They also know their work. I thought about that while she stitched. Tiny, invisible stitches that joined pieces so perfectly you couldn't see the seam. My hands knew their work too. Wringing, scrubbing, hauling water from the pump until my arms shook. But I'd learned to think of that knowledge as damage, not skill. Hold tighter here, Mrs. Chen said, gesturing to where the fabric was starting to slip. I adjusted my grip, and my calloused fingertips, the ones I'd been so ashamed of, provided exactly the friction needed to keep the silk from sliding. Mrs. Chen noticed. You see, soft hands would slip. Your hands hold true. Something shifted in my chest, small but real. We developed our small intimacies. I learned she drank her tea unsweetened and hummed songs in Chinese while she worked. She learned I favored my left shoulder because my right one ached from years of carrying wet laundry. We didn't talk about our lives much, but we existed in each other's space with a comfort I hadn't felt since James died. The dress grew under our hands, bodice attached to skirt, sleeves set with impossible delicacy, lace appliqued in patterns that looked like frost on windows. It was beautiful. It was the most beautiful thing I'd ever touched. One afternoon, Mrs. Harrington came into the shop. I saw her freeze when she noticed me there, gloveless, holding a section of her future daughter-in-law's wedding dress. Her eyes widened, shock, perhaps disgust. I felt my hands start to curl inward, instinct telling me to hide. But Mrs. Chen's voice cut through, calm and certain. Mrs. Rebecca is invaluable. This dress would be impossible without her. Mrs. Harrington's mouth opened, closed. She murmured something about coming back later and left quickly. The door chimes ringing in her wake. I stood there, still holding the fabric, feeling exposed and strange. You don't have to, I started. Yes, Mrs. Chen interrupted. I do. That evening, I walked home on Main Street with my hands bare. No gloves, no pockets, just my scarred hands swinging at my sides in the dusky light. Mrs. Henderson saw me from her porch and stared. The banker's clerk touched his hat, but his eyes dropped to my hands, then away. I made it home and closed the door behind me, breathing hard. That night, I didn't wear gloves to bed. My hands rested uncovered on the quilt, and I looked at them in the lamplight, still scarred, still rough, still honest. They looked the same, but something in how I saw them had shifted. Infinitesimally, like a compass needle finding north. The dress was half finished the night Mrs. Chen made tea and sat down instead of continuing to sew. It was late, nearly 9 o'clock, and I was exhausted from a full day of washing followed by 3 hours of holding fabric. My hands trembled slightly as I set down the section of hem I'd been smoothing. You are tired, Mrs. Chen observed. I'm fine. You are lying. I laughed, surprising myself. Yes, I'm lying. She poured tea into 2 small cups without handles. The bitter smell rose between us. Outside, I could hear the Kansas wind picking up, rattling the shop's windows. The question I'd been holding for 3 weeks finally pushed its way out. Does it stop? The shame? Mrs. Chen sipped her tea and didn't answer immediately. When she finally spoke, her voice was softer than I'd ever heard it. I came to America 30 years ago, young bride, following my husband to the gold fields. He said we would be rich. He said California would make us a new life. She paused. He died in a mine collapse 6 months after we arrived. I was 21 years old, knew perhaps 50 English words, and had one skill. I could sew. I waited, not speaking. The town did not want me. They made this clear in small ways. They would leave coins on my counter rather than touch my hand, as if I carried some contamination. They mispronounced my name until I stopped correcting them. They asked if I was Japanese, Korean, from China, as if all foreign faces were interchangeable. Her fingers tightened on her teacup. I learned shame. I learned to expect it, to carry it, to accept it as the price of survival. But you didn't leave. Where would I go? This was my home too, whether they wanted me or not. She set down her cup. Shame is not about what we are, Mrs. Rebecca. It is about what others fear in themselves. They feared my difference because it reminded them they, too, could be cast out. Your hands remind them of work they pretend does not exist, the labor that sustains their comfort while remaining invisible. I looked at my hands, trembling in my lap. I'm afraid, I admitted. Not that my hands embarrass me. I'm afraid they'll mark Sarah as working class, that my poverty will ruin her chance at belonging. What if my love comes with too high a price? Mrs. Chen reached across the table and took my hands in hers, gnarled holding scarred, rough meeting rough. Her grip was surprisingly strong. Your daughter chose a banker's son, she said, but she requested your hands on her dress. Which truth matters, the town's judgment or your daughter's choice? I wanted to answer but couldn't. My throat had closed. These hands raised her, Mrs. Chen continued, turning my palms up as if reading them. These hands fed her, kept her warm through 7 winters after your husband died, worked until they bled so she could eat, could learn, could grow into a woman who attracts a banker's son. She looked at me directly. These are the most worthy hands to touch her wedding dress. Something broke in my chest, not cleanly, but with a ragged edge that hurt. Tomorrow, Mrs. Chen said, releasing my hands but holding my gaze. I teach you the hemstitch. The bride's mother should leave her mark. I'll ruin it. My voice cracked. My hands shake. The stitches will be uneven. Everyone will see. Yes, Mrs. Chen interrupted. Everyone will see that a mother loves her daughter. That is all they need to see. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that my mark on Sarah's dress could be love instead of damage. But 3 weeks of partnership hadn't undone 7 years of shame. Not yet. "I don't know if I can," I whispered. "Then we will learn together." Mrs. Chen stood, picked up the hem section, and brought it to the work table. "Come, I show you the stitch. You do not have to decide tonight. You only have to learn." I stood on shaking legs and joined her at the table. She threaded a needle with ivory silk, her bent fingers steady despite their pain, and handed it to me. "Like this," she said, demonstrating. "Small, even, each stitch kissing the one before." I took the needle. My rough fingers felt enormous, clumsy, but I pressed the point through fabric and pulled it through, watching the thread follow. One stitch, then another, uneven, uncertain, but there. "Good," Mrs. Chen said, and for the first time in longer than I could remember, I almost believed I might be. 2 weeks until the wedding, and the dress hung in Mrs. Chen's shop like a ghost made of silk and moonlight. It was nearly finished, just the hem remained, and I hadn't touched it yet. Hadn't been able to make myself pick up the needle and mark that perfect fabric with my imperfect hands. Sarah came home from the general store with news that made my stomach clench. "Mrs. Henderson says the church ladies are taking bets on whether you'll actually come to the wedding. Mama." I looked up from mending my work dress. "Taking bets?" "It's cruel gossip." Sarah's face flushed with anger. "Mrs. Patterson said it wouldn't be appropriate, given your station, as if washing clothes makes you less than them." I set down my mending carefully, keeping my hands steady. "Would it be easier if I didn't come?" "What? No, Mama, you have to be there." But I heard the slight hesitation, the fraction of a second where she'd considered it. "To the ceremony, yes," I said slowly, "but perhaps not the reception, at the Harringtons' house, with all their—" "Mama, please." I didn't finish the sentence, but that night I lay awake thinking about it. Maybe my absence would be a gift. Let Sarah shine without poverty's shadow. Let her belong fully to her new life without the constant reminder of where she'd come from. Maybe that was what love looked like, stepping back, disappearing, becoming invisible so she could be seen. The next afternoon, Mrs. Harrington herself came to our door. I was in the middle of washing, hands deep in lye water, when I heard her knock. I dried my hands quickly and opened the door. "Mrs. Garrett." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "May I have a moment?" I let her in, acutely aware of our shabby furniture, the mended curtains, the smell of lye soap that never quite left the house. She didn't sit. "I wanted to speak with you about the wedding reception. I know you've been working so hard, all that washing, and helping with Sarah's dress, too." Her voice dripped with syrupy concern. "You must be absolutely exhausted. I thought perhaps you might prefer to rest during the reception? We wouldn't want you to feel out of place with all of Thomas's family friends. Sometimes it's kinder to avoid situations where we might be uncomfortable." The translation was clear. "We don't want you there." "That's very thoughtful," I heard myself say. "I'll consider it." She left looking satisfied, and I stood in my small kitchen feeling something crumble inside me. She was right, wasn't she? I would be uncomfortable. I would be out of place. My rough hands and mended dress and washerwoman's reputation would cast a shadow over Sarah's perfect day. When I went to Mrs. Chen's shop that evening, I told her I'd decided to skip the reception. The old woman's hands stopped mid-stitch. She set down her needle with more force than necessary. "You think hiding is kindness?" Her voice was sharp. "You teach your daughter to be ashamed of her origins, ashamed of you. That is not love. That is cowardice, born from internalized contempt." I flinched. "You don't understand." "I understand perfectly." Mrs. Chen stood, crossed to where I sat. "I understand a woman who has survived 7 years alone, raised a daughter, worked until her hands bled, and still believes she is not worthy to stand in a room with people who have done nothing but inherit money. It's not about worth. It is only about worth." She pulled the hem section from her work table and thrust it toward me. "You will finish this hem, your hands, your daughter's dress. This is not a request." I looked at the delicate fabric. I'll ruin it. My hands shake. The stitches will be uneven. It'll be permanent, visible. "Yes," Mrs. Chen interrupted. "Permanent, visible. Your mark on your daughter's wedding dress, exactly as it should be." She handed me the needle, already threaded. "Begin." I took it because I didn't know how to refuse her. But my hands were already trembling. I stayed in the shop after Mrs. Chen went home. Told her I wanted to work on the hem, that I'd lock up when I finished. She looked at me with those dark, knowing eyes and finally nodded. "Do not be afraid of imperfection," she said before leaving. "It is the only honest thing." Alone, I spread the hem across the work table. The wedding was 5 days away. 5 days to finish these final inches of silk that would brush the church floor, that everyone would see when Sarah walked down the aisle. I started stitching, stopped, started again. The stitches looked crude to my eyes, too large, too uneven, the thread tension inconsistent. Everything I'd feared confirmed in silk. The memories came while my hands worked. Mrs. Henderson jerking her hand away when I'd tried to help her with a package, as if touching me might contaminate her. The store owner's daughter wrinkling her nose at my work dress, at the smell of lye soap I could never quite wash away. The minister's wife pressing old gloves into my hand after church. "For Sundays, dear, we all want to look our best for the Lord." Each memory settled like a stone in my chest. Each stitch felt like failure made permanent. My hands cramped around midnight. I'd been gripping the needle too tightly. My whole body clenched with decades of anxiety. I looked at my knuckles, swollen, red, bleeding where I'd pricked myself again and again. I could stop now, tell Mrs. Chen in the morning that I'd tried but couldn't do it. Ask her to finish the hem properly with her expert hands. No one would ever know. Sarah would have a perfect dress, unmarked by her mother's poverty. I set down the needle and stared at my hands in the lamplight. These hands had buried my husband. I'd helped lower his coffin into Kansas soil while Sarah cried against my skirt. And these hands hadn't shaken then. These hands had lifted Sarah through measles when she was 6. Her fever so high I thought I'd lose her. They'd held her while she burned, bathing her with cool water, hour after hour, until the fever finally broke. These hands had wrung laundry until they bled, literally bled, so Sarah could eat, could go to school, could have a life different from mine. When did strength become shame? When did survival become something to hide? A memory surfaced, sharp and clear. Sarah, at 6 years old, walking out of church with me. Mrs. Patterson had commented loudly to her friend, "That poor washerwoman, how will she ever provide properly for that child?" Little Sarah had looked up at me with fierce eyes and squeezed my hand tighter. "My mama's hands are strong," she'd announced, loud enough for everyone to hear, not ashamed, proud. When had I learned to be ashamed of what my daughter had once defended? I picked up the needle again, not because I believed I was worthy. I didn't, not yet, but because Mrs. Chen had trusted me, and Sarah had once been proud of me. And sometimes, love means showing up scared and imperfect and honest. I sewed through the night, slowly, carefully, each stitch uneven but deliberate. My hands shook, but they kept moving. By the time dawn light started creeping through the shop windows, the hem was finished. I held it up to examine my work. The stitches were visible if you looked closely, not the invisible perfection of Mrs. Chen's expert hand, but something else, something honest, evidence that I'd tried, that I'd cared enough to try despite my fear. Good enough, I thought. Maybe good enough. I brought the finished dress to Mrs. Chen's shop the next morning, exhausted and uncertain. She arrived moments after me, unlocking the door and finding me standing there with the gown draped over my arms like a sleeping child. She didn't speak, just took the dress from me, spread the hem across her work table, and examined my stitches in the early light. I held my breath, waiting for her to point out every flaw. And there were flaws. I could see them. Uneven spacing and inconsistent tension, and all the ways my rough hands had left their mark. Mrs. Chen ran her gnarled fingers along the hem. Once, twice. Then she looked up at me. "Good," she said simply. "Honest work. The dress is complete." She paused, holding my gaze. "And you? Are you complete?" I understood the question. Had I finished hiding? Could I attend the wedding with uncovered hands, visibly working class, publicly scarred? Could I stand beside my daughter in front of the whole town and claim my place as her mother? "I don't know," I whispered. "Then decide now. Will you be at her wedding? All of it. Ceremony and reception?" My heart hammered. "No gloves?" "No gloves." "They'll stare. They'll judge." "Yes," Mrs. Chen's voice was firm. "They will, and you will stand there anyway." I thought about Mrs. Harrington's cruel kindness, about the church lady's gossip, about every person who'd ever made me feel less than human because I worked with my hands. Then I thought about Sarah at 6 years old, defending my strong hands, about the hem I'd just finished despite my fear, about Mrs. Chen's arthritic fingers creating beauty despite pain. "I'll be there," I said. My voice shook, but I didn't take it back. "No gloves." Mrs. Chen nodded once, satisfied. "Good. Now go home. Rest. The wedding is in 3 days, and you will need your strength." The morning of the wedding. I helped Sarah into her dress. We stood in her small bedroom, the room she'd grown up in, the room she'd be leaving, and I lifted the gown over her head, careful not to disturb her pinned hair. The silk slid down her body like water, settling into place as if it had been made for her, which it had. Mrs. Chen's expert hands and my rough ones working together to create this moment. Sarah looked at herself in the mirror and started crying. "It's so beautiful, Mama. Thank you. Thank you for helping make it." I stood behind her, my hands resting on her shoulders. In the mirror, I could see them clearly, scarred, calloused, swollen at the knuckles. They looked exactly like what they were, a washerwoman's hands, but they were also the hands that had raised this beautiful girl. Both truths could exist at once. "Mama." Sarah turned to face me, and before I could hide, she reached for my hands, took them in hers, held them up between us in the morning light. My instinct screamed to pull away, to hide, to apologize. But I forced myself to stay still. Let her see. Let her see everything. The scars, the calluses, the cracked knuckles, the permanent redness that no amount of cream would ever fade. "Mama, your hands." Her voice caught. This was it. The moment she'd finally see what I really was, what I'd always been. The moment she'd realize her mother was just a poor washerwoman with rough hands and... "Mrs. Chen told me," Sarah continued, still holding my hands, "that you sewed the hem, that you were so afraid but you did it anyway because you love me." I couldn't speak, could barely breathe. Sarah pressed my scarred hands against her smooth cheek. "These hands built my life, Mama. Every scar is a day you chose me over comfort. Every callus is evidence that you worked so I wouldn't have to. I'm not ashamed of them." Her voice broke. "I'm proud of them." "I'm proud of you." The tears came then, sudden and overwhelming. Not shame tears, recognition tears. She saw me fully, poverty and scars and rough labor, and she loved what she saw. Not despite the scars, because of them. "Will you hold my hand when we walk to the church?" Sarah asked. "I want everyone to see us together. I want them to know who raised me." I nodded, unable to speak. We stood there, hands clasped, for a long moment. Then Sarah smiled, Her father's smile, the one that had first made me fall in love all those years ago. "Let's go show them what strong hands look like," she said. We walked to the church together, hands intertwined. Main Street stretched before us, and I felt every eye turn to watch. Mrs. Henderson on her porch, the banker's clerk in his window, the minister's wife sweeping her steps, all of them staring at our clasped hands, one smooth, one scarred, both visible, both real. I was terrified, but I didn't let go. The church was full. Every pew packed with society, the Harrington circle, the banker's friends, the same people who'd whispered about whether a washerwoman belonged at such an event. I sat in the front pew with my hands resting in my lap, uncovered, visible, present. I felt their eyes on me, the way you feel winter wind, sharp, cutting, impossible to ignore. Mrs. Harrington in the pew across the aisle, her mouth a thin line of disapproval. The banker's wife, leaning to whisper to her neighbor. The store owner's pointed stare at my hands, my mended dress, my washerwoman's reputation made visible in this polished space. I felt it all, and I stayed. The ceremony began. Sarah walked down the aisle on Mr. Garrett's arm. He'd agreed to stand in as father, a kindness I'd remember, and her dress caught the light streaming through the windows. The hem I'd sewn brushed the church floor with each step, invisible to everyone but Sarah, Mrs. Chen, and me. But we knew that was enough. The reception at the Harrington house was worse. I stood among the society ladies in their silk dresses and diamond jewelry, acutely aware of every way I didn't belong. The chandelier overhead probably cost more than I'd earned in 5 years. The champagne glasses were crystal. The table linens were the ones I'd washed and starched last month, and I recognized a stain I'd spent an hour removing. One of Mrs. Harrington's friends, a woman whose name I didn't know but whose undergarments I'd certainly washed, commented loudly enough to be overheard. "How lovely Sarah looks, despite her circumstances. Such a shame about her mother's situation." My hands curled into fists at my sides. Blood rushed in my ears. I started to turn, to leave, to make myself invisible the way I'd learned to do. Then Mrs. Chen appeared at my elbow. She didn't speak, just stood beside me. Another outsider. Another woman the town tolerated but never truly welcomed. 2 marginalized women refusing invisibility through simple presence. Sarah crossed the room toward us, carrying something wrapped in white silk. She unwrapped it slowly, deliberately, in full view of the assembled guests. A handkerchief, ivory silk, hemmed with the same uneven stitches I'd used on her dress. "My mother made this," Sarah announced clearly, her voice carrying through the suddenly quiet room. "With the hands that raised me. The hands that worked." She emphasized the word, looking directly at the woman who'd made the cruel comment. "So I could stand here today. I asked her to hem this handkerchief because I want to carry her strength with me into my new life." Silence. Absolute silence. Then, unexpectedly, the minister's wife began to clap. Slowly, others joined. Not everyone. Mrs. Harrington notably did not, her face frozen in polite disapproval. But enough. Enough to shift the air in the room, to create a space where I could breathe. I looked at Sarah, and she looked back at me with fierce love. She'd chosen this, not just accepted me despite my poverty, but claimed me because of my strength. As the reception wound down and guests began to leave, Mrs. Chen took my hand. "You did well." I looked at our clasped hands, one Chinese, one white, both marked by decades of labor, both worthy. "We did well," I corrected. She smiled. It was the first time I'd seen her truly smile. "Yes, we did." That night, alone in my small rented house, I sat at the kitchen table with a lamp burning low. I held my hands up to the light and examined them honestly for the first time in 7 years. They were still scarred, still rough, still evidence of hard years and harder choices. The calluses hadn't softened, The cracks hadn't healed. My knuckles were still swollen, my nails still broken despite my care. But I saw them differently now. Not markers of shame, but proof of love. Not evidence of poverty, but testament to survival. These hands had built a life from nothing, fed a daughter through grief and hardship, created beauty despite pain, not just in the dress, but in the woman Sarah had become. These were worthy hands. They had always been worthy hands. I just needed to learn to see them truly. I wore no gloves to my daughter's wedding, and I never would again.